there is an ongoing conversation between, your brain and your ovaries. And as you age, you get into perimenopause. And guess what? Your ovaries get hard of hearing. So when they get hard of hearing, then your hypothalamus says, didn't you hear me? And it starts yelling and it starts giving more and more and more signal to the point where you're just completely deaf. Menopause is deafness of your ovaries. So
I love
yes,
this.
you can
I'm going to have to
credit
steal this, but I will give you credit.
Today, I am joined on The Second Opinion with the infamous, the phenomenal Dr. Mary Claire Haver. And we're going to talk about our favorite topic, which is, of course, menopause. And for those of you, the two people in America who do not know who Dr. Mary Claire Haver is, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is one of the most influential voices in menopause today. She's not only a board-certified OB-GYN, she's a certified menopause practitioner and the founder of Mary Claire Wellness, the creator of Pause Life. She has been a #1 New York Times bestselling author. She has written The Galveston Diet and The New Menopause, and you have a new book coming out on perimenopause. And I have to say, you have I don't know how many million followers you're going to tell me, but I know it's at least 7, maybe more. And Mary Claire, I cannot tell you what a privilege it has been to work with you over these past few years. And I want to welcome you to The Second Opinion.
Thank you. I don't think I'd be sitting here in this position if I hadn't been sitting in the audience listening to you talk all those years ago about the Women's Health Initiative. You were interviewing Avram Blooming and Carol Tavris in their book, Estrogen Matters. And as a board certified OB-GYN, and I'd kept up with my CMEs every year. I maintained my certification every year. You were the first voice that had clearly explained to me why so much of that study was mishandled and the information that came out around it, how it changed the trajectory of women's health. I had no idea. And so for that changed the trajectory of my life. That one sitting in that audience, listening to you speak and made me realize this is the path. I need to spread this message. I need to take all these words she said and amplify them the best way I can. And I think that's what got me here.
That is so sweet. And I just want to know, then I would like at least a 10% cut on all the things that happened to Mary Claire after this. Thank you very much. But no, because when we met, I guess it's probably been 3 years ago.
3.5, if not 4. We're going on 4 this year.
Yeah, we're going on 4. 3.5 years. We were just starting to move about the cabin, after COVID. And we went to this. That was also the first time I met Avram Blooming, by the way.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, all of us were just seeing each other in real life. I think we had seen each other in the virtual space. And your book had just come out then, The Galveston Diet. Is that right?
That's right.
And you have a very interesting path because you're an OB-GYN.
Yeah.
Now tell me how you got from OB-GYN to nutrition and writing a book, not about OB-GYN stuff, but actually about the Galveston Diet.
So I settled into an academic practice based at the University of Texas Medical Branch, where I'm back on now as adjunct faculty. And I was happy. I was delivering babies and doing surgery and doing all the things a general OB-GYN does. And I was super busy. My personality combined with, I was friends with, the nurses, the researchers, the PhDs, and you want to go see your friends, right? When you have a baby or have a GYN complication. So I had this bustling private practice through the university, but I also taught. I was teaching medical students, residents, and I was the assistant residency program director off and on for about 10 years. So I was heavily involved in education. But as I was aging and my patients were aging, things were changing. And I didn't know enough to connect the dots at the time that this was perimenopause and menopause. But what I was focused on from someone who had had thin privilege most of her life was this sudden body composition change. For me, in my mind, it was a weight gain, but I was suddenly developing a belly where I never had. And I was what I thought was healthy. I was exercising regularly. I was eating what I thought was healthy. Turns out I needed some tweaks. And I started, calorically restricting, working out more. Nothing was working. And my patients were complaining of the same thing. So that was the initial, something's happening here that I don't understand. And I need to learn more about this. So several of my patients were nutrition scientists, PhDs in dietetics and nutrition science. And we had a really robust community at UTMB in the nutrition world. They worked a lot with NASA just up the road, and it was pretty fascinating. And so I went to them and I said, hey, what's going on in midlife with women? Why are we seeing this weight gain? They said, well, it's probably more body composition change. Here's a bunch of articles on what we're finding and where menopause may be playing a part here. And I was like, menopause? How could that have anything to do with weight gain? So that kind of relationship sent me down a rabbit hole of research. And I looked into getting a master's degree in nutrition, but it's really hard to do when you're working full time.
Yeah.
And, going online, and I said, hey, there's this really great program called culinary medicine. And the president of it had actually spoke at the AOA, the AOA Society. I was a member of that. And so that's the honor.
Tell them what
AOA is
is.
the honor society for physicians. And so I was an AOA member, and I was a clinical faculty for the program at our university. And so we had this speaker come in, and I was immediately like, I want to do this. This makes sense to me. I want to learn more about nutrition, because we both know, but what most lay people don't know is most doctors, unless we have a bachelor's or a master's in nutrition, we learn really nothing clinically significant. And we learn tons about pharmacology and medicine and lots of wonderful things, but we don't learn basic nutrition. So I was seeing this gap in my knowledge, and I wanted to fill it. And so from all of that learning, I developed what I called the Galveston diet. I didn't want to call it the Mary Claire diet. I didn't even want to call it a diet, but it just made sense, because in medicine, a diet is a pattern of eating, right? It's not like, are you on a diet? It's what's your diet? And I was coaching my patients through this. And then I just started talking about it on the internet one day on Facebook, and that little world kind of exploded. So from the online love of me doing it, I wrote a book and then developed an online program with coaching that really kind of exploded. I had no idea that would become something that would basically replace my OB-GYN salary.
Well, you're absolutely right. We don't get any training in nutrition. We, as physicians, tell our patients all the time, eat right, exercise, eat right. Okay, well, what does that look like? And we really don't know. I mean, I think we learn about digestion, but we don't learn anything about nutrition. And I think it's very important that we adjust and understand that as we age, our diet should change as well. You and I both share this in common. We're one of 8 children. Mm-hmm. I think that we're probably the only two OB-GYNs that we know who are from such large families. But, I'm the youngest of those 8 children. And I had the benefit of watching. Mm-hmm. I watched my siblings go from normal weight, young adults, to middle age, and then, overweight, and then it crossed the line into obesity. So it was always something that was top of mind for me, mm-hmm. because I said, it didn't start out that way. So let's figure out what we're going to do to not end up on that road. It's a good thing that we're having this conversation now, because you know what? Nutrition is back in the news.
Yep.
And our HHS secretary, RFK Jr., has just upended the food pyramid. So
upside down.
Tell me a little bit about, all right, what do you think about that? And tell me what does this mean?
It has filled my social media feed ad nauseum this week. And I've seen multiple. I always go to the experts. I'm like, what are the nutrition scientists saying? And that includes the registered dietitians and the PhDs, in nutrition. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's good and bad, right? So I think limiting ultra-processed foods, everyone agrees. There's no argument about that. Right. Limiting ultra-processed foods. Where some of the discrepancy is, the heavy on the red meat, heavy on the whole, the higher fat, dairy products is going to be, there's nuance to everything, right? Mm-hmm. And when you look at population health and population data, I don't think most Americans were following the original pyramid, right? I think if we would follow that pyramid, we would not have the level of obesity we had today.
Is true.
Now, flipping the pyramid upside down, is that going to have Americans change their diet? Americans need to, by and large, change their diet, okay? Simply flipping the pyramid upside down, I don't know what that's going to do, right? And so is not going to cause, it's not going to cure food scarcity. It's not going to make people who live in food deserts easier to access whole fruits. You know, the pyramid emphasizes whole fruits and vegetables. For someone like you and me who are educated and have income we can devote to this type of thing, it's easy. It's much easier for me than for someone who's living on a very tight budget. And guess what? Ultra-processed foods are much easier to fit in their budget. What I wish the NHS, would do would be to address some of these reasons why people are struggling to follow any food pyramid, regardless of its shape.
I want to talk about something, Mary Claire, that, has come up, and we just need to be straight up about this. Mm-hmm. You have a supplement line.
I do.
You do. And, you get flack for this.
I do. And that's okay. I knew that when I made so back in Galveston Diet, when that was the focus of what I was doing, trying to coach people on nutrition, right? Good nutrition. I realized that women are struggling to get enough vitamin D in their diet. Literally, as an American, it is very, very difficult to get enough vitamin D and to absorb it through the food sources, right? 80% of my clinical patients in my menopause clinic now are vitamin D deficient, not just low. I mean, like well below recommended levels. So how do we, I can't order her to eat a pound of salmon every day, right? Like that's untenable here. And so supplementation for those patients is recommended. So in certain areas, protein, supplementation, I started with fiber and vitamin D. Those were my first two supplements. The two top things that my patients and the people who we were coaching in our nutrition plan were struggling to get enough in their diet every day. And it seemed reasonable. And, some of my patients, and I'm sure you as well, will come into clinic well-meaning with grocery bags full of buckets of supplements and things I can't even pronounce. I don't know what they are, of dubious quality. They're getting them off the internet without any testing. And I was just always frustrated. Like, how can I point them to a good, high-quality, third-party tested source? And someone whispered in my ear, why don't you build it? Why don't you, you're recommending this by the thousands. You can create, you can do whatever you want. You're not, no, doctors don't do supplements. That's a bad thing. I grew up in that school, so I really struggled with the decision. Do I do this or not? And I'm like, my patients come first and they trust me. They don't have to buy it from me, but I can give them a high quality third-party tested that I developed to my exact specifications that I am comfortable recommending and giving to them. And if they buy it from me, great. And it's going to be priced competitively. And if they don't buy it from me, that's okay too. And
I think that's important because we also need to look at this from the standpoint of you're not just some random OB-GYN, recommending supplements. You've had the experience of studying nutrition, of really doing a deep dive into this that maybe gives you a little bit of credibility that some other people may not have. And I think that we can both agree that, given the option, it's better to eat
right.
It's better to
I
eat.
say that constantly. I wish you didn't need to supplement anything.
Right. Right. And that's why, and one of my big problems with the supplement market generally is because of just what you're saying. You don't know what you're getting. There are so many people out there that are selling supplements. They're not tested. You don't have any guarantee that either what they say is in it, or in the correct amounts. And there are all these other trace things, that contaminants, lead, arsenic, that may be in supplements. So
yes, the FDA is not regulating, meaning they're not coming in and batch testing. We do that on our own. We do it twice, actually.
Right.
So, they're tested at the facility and then we send them out for third-party testing. And it's very expensive, but to me, it's worth it.
It is. It is. And I understand. I was doing a little research on that too, to figure out what do you have to do to get that. And it is expensive, and that's why people don't do it. But, that's important. Now, but we're going to get to the real reason that we're here today, because we're going to talk about menopause. And I remember you posting at some point, you were saying that early in your career, you said you were a terrible menopause practitioner. What do you mean by that?
So I went with what I was taught. And that women go through menopause at 50, 51. I didn't even know, honestly, Sharon, that there was like this Like I couldn't have told you at 45 years old what the normal range of entering menopause was. All I could have done was spell perimenopause. I could not have clinically explained on an endocrine basis what is happening in the ovaries. In my mind, it was this quiet, slow decline of ovarian function until the ovaries petered out. And once she was a year past her last menstrual cycle, then we could just begin the discussion of treating her hot flashes, but only if they're severe. And the last thing on that list of possible treatment options would be hormone therapy because it is so dangerous. That is what I graduated with, because 2002 was the year I graduated, and all clinically relevant, meaningful menopause education went out the window with that one study.
And you and I are exactly 10 years apart, because I finished residency in 1992, which means I was in med school in the 80s. And I was just coming of age at the time when the conversation about hormones was very different. And we were just getting the information. We're like, hormones, they're great. They're great. And they're going to decrease your risk of heart disease. That was the message and that I took forward for those 10 years before the Women's Health Initiative, which of course upended everything. But I think that even though you and I talk about menopause all day, every day, it would not be a bad idea for our listeners to really just define what is perimenopause, what is menopause.
So I think starting with menopause. So the medical definition of menopause is problematic, but here it is. It is, for our listeners, it is 1 year exactly after your final menstrual period. But what it represents is something much more important. It represents the end of the production of hormones from your ovaries. The ovaries have been spent, and they will never be able again to produce any physiologic amounts of hormones unless there's a tumor or something. So, and every single woman is going to go through this transition if she lives long enough. So perimenopause is a time phase 4 to 10 years-ish, somewhere in that window, of when you go from normal, predictable reproductive cycles that about 90% of us have, okay? Meaning a regular monthly period, an ebb and flow that is predictable. On day 15, your estradiol usually does this. On day 21, it does that. On day 14, it does something else. But that is a EKG-like, beautifully reproducible curve month after month after month, unless you're pregnant or have some suppression or on birth control, okay? Perimenopause is when, what most women need to understand is that ovulation begins in the brain, not in the ovaries. There are signals coming from the brain that tell our ovaries what to do. The ovaries are just little innocent bystanders who produce hormones when they're told to, okay? They don't do it on their own. So the signal's coming from the brain. You don't have enough eggs left in supplies. So when the brain was used to getting that feedback of estrogen coming from the ovaries predictable, it becomes chaotic. So the brain gets mad looking for the estrogen. The ovaries can't produce it at the usual amount. So it starts pounding the ovary with increasingly higher dose levels of the stimulating hormones of FSH mostly and LH. So we can measure that FSH at certain times of the cycle and see that it's higher than it used to be. No one actually does this, but we could. And the ovaries struggle to respond. You'll start ovulating, but it becomes irregular. Okay. And then eventually that cadence of ovulation gets further and further apart on average until everything is depleted.
There is an ongoing conversation between, your brain and your ovaries. And as you age, you get into perimenopause. And guess what? Your ovaries get hard of hearing. So when they get hard of hearing, then your hypothalamus says, didn't you hear me? And it starts yelling and it starts giving more and more and more signal to the point where you're just completely deaf. Menopause is deafness of your ovaries. So
I love
yes,
this.
you can
I'm going to have to
steal
steal this, but I will give you credit.
But there's another thing that I think confuses women too, is that when we talk about hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, and now we're changing the language and we're saying menopause hormone therapy, and people are starting to get confused because what are you talking about? What is the difference? And here is my rationale about this. Not everybody who is on hormones is menopausal.
Right.
So to say that, or to say that to a 30-year-old who's had her ovaries out, that to me is more stigmatizing than just saying you're on hormone replacement or hormone therapy. So Can we agree? Can we
It's
do
an
that?
academic semantic thing.
I know.
And it's like society's getting their feathers ruffled. And I just try to communicate at a level that makes sense to a patient.
Exactly.
I have a question for you, though.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm quoting Elizabeth Cohen a little bit here, but I went to the Bitches Be Crazy School of Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I mean by that is, to put it in medical terms, I was taught, this wasn't written in a textbook, but it was just this overlying, because, we did OB-GYN. So there was a hint of it in medical school, but they really laid it on thick in clinical practice, that women tend to somaticize psychological issues. So if you can't figure it out, she'd be crazy.
Yeah.
And so looking back historically, whenever women's health and men's health kind of split, like in heart disease or with menopause, there's this kind of, I was trained with this sense of, she's just, she's emotional, she's crazy.
Yeah.
And that really formulated, like when I talk about why I wasn't a great menopause doctor, that's a huge part of it.
Well, that's kind of how we deal with the women generally. I mean, we're always minimizing. If we don't know the answer, then clearly it must not exist. And, that's sort of how, whether we're talking about menopause, heart disease, anything else that women have, even mental health issues. And we just get into this mindset of minimizing women's complaints. And let me just say to everyone here, and this isn't male bashing, this is just saying that we were raised and taught in a system that wasn't meant for women.
For the listeners out there who are coming from my world, Dr. Malone, I went to state schools. She has a pedigree that makes me blush. And, you went to the most venerated, the most highest ranked institutions in America for all of your education, your training, all of it. And it's so impressive to me because I am a state school girl. So just to hear you admit that was your education as well makes me feel better. That you didn't receive something special, or no, we were never taught that. Women,
No, we were taught very inaccurate things, not only about women, they were derogatory. We were also taught very racist things that we didn't think were racist at the time.
Yeah, same.
But we now understand that there was really no scientific basis behind why we did some of the things or why we treated or looked at people the way that we did. But, now we know, and now we have an opportunity to do better. And I think and the way that we do this is really having these conversations and acknowledging that it exists. I want to mention something because I saw a little something. I'm going to be talking to Hannah Brofman in a couple of weeks or so. Mm-hmm. I saw something, she did a Substack post saying that you and Rachel Rubin, who is also one of our colleagues that we love, and she's here in the DC area. And you were talking about the concept of having a pit crew as we age. So tell me, what do you mean by, as we go through this, we need a pit crew?
Well, there's you need, when you look at a pit crew and how they function, right? The car comes in and there's multiple things going on at once. And there's one person who's kind of in charge to make sure that, and that should be your primary care doctor. It might be your OB-GYN. And then the rest of the pit crew is the cardiologists, the specialists who come in with their specialized knowledge. But there's always someone who is there to make sure. And I think that's how medicine started. But I think with the takeover of medicine by industry, we're losing that. We in these 15-minute little visits and these patient panels that are being forced onto clinicians, it is impossible to have a pit crew. You're literally just treating little issues in silos. We were told in my academic practice, I was told I am not allowed to address more than one complaint on this visit. I am not allowed. Or at least I couldn't document it. And, I'm the Hydra trying to, all of us, do the best I can for the patient. And that's a financial decision. That has nothing to do with me. And so we've lost the ability to have a pit crew in the current way that medicine is being delivered to most women.
And not only that, but if you're trying to assemble your own pit crew, and here's I love these analogies. There's no pit crew chief for most women. And I think that what happens is like, okay, you pull into one station and you get your tires fixed, and then you go to another one and someone changes something else. And
they're not communicating.
Exactly. That is exactly what I was going to say. So no one has told anybody about what happened in the stop before. And that's a problem that I see ongoing. And that's why one of the things that I say to patients, you've got to be your own pit boss, because if you thought that there was someone who was managing all that in the background, they aren't.
That doesn't exist.
No, it does not exist. But I want to get to the nuts and bolts of the hormone issue, because we talk all the time, but I have to remind myself that not everybody has listened to everything that I have said, which much to my chagrin. Really, you didn't hear me say that already? But let's go through the basics. And I think that a conversation about hormone replacement therapy or menopausal hormone therapy is really important to have. And most people don't realize, who's it for? When do you take it? And what are the options? So let's just start with the beginning. Hormone replacement therapy. When could or should a woman start hormone therapy?
The minute she's symptomatic. So, and that could be perimenopause, that could be postmenopause, any time of her menopause when she notices symptoms. And those symptoms could be sleep disruption, brain fog, joint pain, dry skin, there's not an organ system that's left behind. But until you understand this and realize, wait a minute, this could be a sign of my perimenopause. There's some things that wave red flags, like cycle disruption, periods becoming irregular or heavier. I mean, any kind of period disruption, whether it's more or less, heavy, light, there, not there, all of that is a possibility through the menopause transition. So that's like, oh, okay. Most women knows that might be my perimenopause, and certainly hot flashes. We've done a good job educating the world about what a hot flash is, how to recognize it, and that it might be related to your menopause. Where we're falling behind is the other 73 symptoms of menopause. But anytime you're symptomatic, it is reasonable to say, and it's not like, is it too early or is it too late? The question should be, am I suffering needlessly?
Right. And to give our listeners just a little bit of a time frame. Generally speaking, if you're between the ages of 35 and 50 and you start having any of those symptoms, and the symptoms are generally worse in the menopausal transition or perimenopause than they are after menopause. I want to think for a moment there that another thing that's come up that I hear a lot, and I know you hear it a lot, and that is women who are angry. The women who are saying, oh my God, I should be on hormone therapy, and I feel like I've been left out of this conversation because I'm now over 60 and nobody ever brought this up to me. What do you say to that patient?
You have a right to be pissed. You should be angry, but let's talk about this, because now it becomes a nuanced individual counseling and decision. We're not looking at population studies. We are looking at you. And what do we know? What is the current status of your risk of cardiovascular disease? What is the current status of your bone strength? How is your vagina and your bladder and your genital urinary system? Now, when we get into the types of hormone therapy, I want to be clear. We have systemic, which is brains, bones, hearts, all over your body. Okay. And a little bit gets to the vagina, and sometimes that's enough. But for a lot of patients, she cannot get enough penetration of the systemic doses because systemic was developed for hot flashes, and it doesn't take much. Okay. It is not approaching what your estrogen levels that were running in your premenopausal years. Okay. And so we aren't getting enough penetration for most of us to the genital urinary system. So you need vaginal estrogen as well. And everyone can take vaginal estrogen and should. So I want to be clear about that. Estrogen, the discussion around local estrogen therapy for the skin or the vagina, vulva, is a very different conversation than we're talking about systemic hot flashes, brain health, bones, etc.
And another thing that I think merits a little bit of conversation is that we don't ever say you can't.
Yeah.
Because I think on an individual basis, it depends. It depends on what your symptoms.
It's a strong maybe, and let's talk about it. And women are being denied that conversation.
That's exactly right. Because what's the difference between 59 and a half and 60 or 60 and 61? And I think that is where the nuanced conversation is important, and having someone to talk to about it who really understands. Because we spend a lot of time, I know, talking about what the guidelines are. But guidelines are just that. They're guidelines.
They're guidelines.
There's not a
They
law.
are not laws. They are population-based. What is best for most, but it's not necessarily what is best for you. Should every single woman be on hormone therapy? No. But every single woman deserves the conversation.
I agree. Now, that's a good point to make, because who are the women who it is not recommended for?
Okay.
And I don't want to say can't, but who are the women for whom it is not
recommended? So anyone who has undiagnosed vaginal bleeding. So if you are in your menopause and you are having bleeding and it has not been evaluated, we don't know if it's a polyp, a fibroid, atrophy, whatever it's coming from. It could be a tumor, and we don't want to give you hormones that could feed that tumor. Okay? Done. A breast mass, we don't know anything about. You need to go get that evaluated. It's not the time to start hormone therapy. Okay? Breast cancer that is actively being treated, especially estrogen receptor positive, you know, that is going to be a patient who we are going to steer away from hormone therapy because she's on an anti-estrogen to limit the recurrence of her hormone or to treat her cancer. That doesn't mean when she's done treating her cancer, however many years out, that she may not consider some systemic therapy. She's still a candidate for vaginal. Okay. If you have active liver disease, we need to look at this closely. Severe liver disease. I'm not talking about mild fatty liver with, mildly elevated LFTs. Severe liver disease. Estrogen is cleared in the liver. We need to, that needs to be monitored very closely to make sure we're not giving you something that you can't clear properly, and we need to go with a much lower dose. Okay. That's not absolute no. That's let's work very closely together to figure out, get your liver in its healthiest spot, and then go very low and slow and see how you're, check some levels to see how you're clearing your estrogen. What else? A recent blood clot, a DVT workup. Okay. So oral estrogen, not transdermal, not vaginal. Oral estrogen can increase your clotting factors. So while you're getting your workup for your blood clots, while you're being treated, we are usually going to remove you from hormone therapy until that is managed. And then we can have the discussion moving forward. What is the best option for you? And it's not an absolute no.
And I think that is where a little bit of humility, in all these discussions that we have. And I think it's saying to our patients, this is the best evidence that we have today. Is it going to be different next year, 10 years from now? Probably. And that's regarding a lot of the things that we do. But I think that even when we look at the things like blood clots, having had a DVT or a PE, or things like of having had breast cancer, those used to be absolute no, never. And now even the guidelines have acknowledged the fact that we've probably been a little bit too stringent, and that requires a little bit more conversation. So there are very few things that are absolute no's about hormone therapy. So find somebody who knows what they're talking about. And if someone sort of puts you off on that, then, that's where you got to find somebody else on that.
Starting something new isn't just hard, it's scary. When I launched this podcast, I kept thinking, what if no one listens? What if I fail? What if I'm not ready? But taking that leap was one of the best decisions I've made, and having the right partner makes it easier. For millions of businesses, that partner is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., from brands just getting started to household names. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, you can build a beautiful online store that fits your brand. Shopify's AI tools write product descriptions, headlines, even enhance photos, saving you time. You can create email and social campaigns to reach customers wherever they're scrolling. And everything lives in one place. Inventory, payments, analytics, plus that iconic purple Shop Pay button, giving you the best converting checkout on the planet. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/second opinion. Go to shopify.com/second opinion. That's shopify.com/second opinion. Last winter, my family and I took a trip to a beautiful, quiet lakeside town, and it felt like home the second we arrived. So I plan on going back this summer. It was one of those places that felt like home the second we arrived, and I can't wait to go back. This time, morning espresso with the windows open, fresh air, and walks around the lake. And while I was there, totally unplugged and relaxing, I had the thought, while I'm away, someone else could be enjoying my home the same way I'm enjoying theirs. Hosting is such a special way to create a comfortable space for fellow travelers, and it's kind of amazing knowing someone gets to experience your neighborhood the way you do. The coffee shop around the corner, the park down the street, the cozy couch after a long day exploring. And the extra income? That doesn't hurt either. It can go toward the next plane ticket, a bucket list trip, or honestly, just everyday life. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host. Midlife can be confusing for so many women, and I hear it all the time. Trouble sleeping, hot flashes, brain fog, weight changes, and not knowing where to turn or who will actually listen. After years of caring for women in perimenopause and menopause, I've seen how hard it is to get real answers. That's why I believe in Alloy. Alloy is a digital health platform that connects women with menopause-specialized doctors who understand this stage of life. They offer a wide range of solutions, from hormone therapy to clinically proven options for hair loss, weight care, sexual health, and skin care designed specifically for midlife. Getting started is simple. Go to myalloy.com, complete a quick intake, and within hours, you'll connect with a menopause-specialized doctor who creates a personalized treatment plan. Everything is online with no long waits, and care is delivered straight to your door. And you'll get $25 off your first order today when you use code TSO25. Head to myalloy.com and enter code TSO25 to get $25 off your first order. Alloy offers expert care, real answers, and ongoing support for women in midlife.
The FDA has committed to removing the black box warning on hormone therapy. So tell our listeners, what exactly is the black box, how to get there, and why is this such a big deal that it's coming off?
So the black box is a black box that is at when you open the prescribing information. So when anyone gets a prescription for anything, it will come with a little sheet of folded paper, right? So those are the how to take it, all the warnings. But, for things with a black box, very front and center, black boxes are for life-threatening conditions, things that could be life-threatening. I'm talking cyanide. Okay.
Right. It's the strongest. It's the strongest
warning.
possible.
Chemotherapy has black box warnings because it is a poison, right? Meant to poison certain cells and hopefully let the other ones keep going. And so after the WHI came out and the absolute frenzy over it, the FDA, they didn't even have a committee. They didn't even, there was no consensus committee. There was just a unilateral decision to put the black box on all estrogen-containing products, okay, for hormone therapy, including vaginal estrogen. So when you go to your doctor and you get your, recommendation, okay, I'm going to try this vaginal estrogen. I have this horrible atrophy. I'm having recurrent UTIs. I've had sepsis. I've, had all these complications, painful sex, whatever it is. You go get your vaginal estrogen, you open up your paper because you want to be a good citizen and make sure you're doing everything right. And the first thing it says is that it could kill you. It could cause heart disease, stroke, diabetes. None of this has ever been proven clinically. And
dementia.
It scares you to death.
Yeah.
Most patients just throw it in the trash and don't call their doctor, and the ones who are brave enough to call get reassured, but still are nervous, or their partners get involved and say, I don't want you to take this. We just won't have sex, because this could kill you. This is what the paper says. So that warning never should have been there. It was such an overcall. It was such a drama that didn't need to be there. And let me be clear, this administration, and Marty McCary, that was one of his missions, is to have this removed. He never thought it should have been there, and for good reasoning. But we've had multiple committees go to the FDA over the last, since 2008. So multiple administrations, multiple different heads of the FDA have been approached. Take this off. It's unnecessary. The warning should be in the usual warning section, just like any pros and cons of any medication. But this saying that she's going to die if there's a possibility of death if she takes it, is unnecessary. And finally, it's happened. And we were overjoyed to have it removed, because it's removing a barrier to necessary care.
And let me just make this clear. It didn't just happen. You're right. There has been advocacy for getting this warning off the box
for multiple societies.
Decades, for a decade or more. And I think this is where I think we have to give ourselves a little credit here, is because it happened because the issue got raised.
We got loud.
I want to, we're going to do a little part here at the end, which I love, because you and I agree probably about 98% of the time on most of the things. But that's why we call it the second opinion. We don't have to agree, because there are some things that you do it one way, I do it another. So we're going to have a little lightning round here. Okay. And I want to say, all right. And I think some of this we've done already, but it's a good summary. All right. Timing of initiation of HRT. Wait or start early?
Start early.
Okay. Should every woman take HRT?
If she has a contraindication, no, but everybody else should consider it.
Okay. Everyone deserves the conversation. Okay, here's a good one. Oral versus transdermal estrogen.
God, that's hard since I'm on both. I start with transdermal and then we'll switch to oral if she doesn't, we have an issue with the patch, but I generally start with transdermal. But oral is cheaper.
What I don't want to have happen is to get into this dichotomy that oral is bad and transdermal is good. It depends.
It depends.
And it depends. And I think that, so I don't want people to be afraid of oral hormones.
No.
I take oral. So all I want to say, oral versus transdermal depends, and it depends on what your treatment goals are and what you are comfortable with in terms of treating. So again, not bad. All right. Bioidentical versus non-bioidentical progestins. Okay.
Ooh, okay. I start now, we got about 10% of people who don't tolerate it. So I start with oral I do not use medroxyprogesterone. I start with oral micronized progesterone, which is bioidentical. For our subset of patients who don't tolerate it, then we're moving into the progestins or to the Duo-V. We usually play around with different progestins, but there's some women who just will not tolerate any kind of progestogen. And so for those, then we move on to the Duo-V.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are people who do not tolerate the micronized progesterone. And you're right. And that a lot of the symptoms that people attribute to hormone therapy really kind of comes more the progestogen that's causing the problems, not really the estrogen.
I like having options.
Exactly.
Bioidentical is my starting point for most patients.
I agree. If you, given the option, do the bioidentical if it's tolerated. All right. Pellets.
No.
Okay. Why?
I love so I don't need them. It's the most expensive. It is the most invasive, and it is the least studied option. And there's one particular brand of pellets, a company that makes pellets, that routinely super physiologically doses patients. So I have patients come in who've been on whatever pellet, and I always routinely check a testosterone level. And I'm speaking specifically to the testosterone component of the pellet, not the estrogen. And so they are all super physiologic if they're within 9 weeks of their pellet, meaning they are massively overdosed compared to what a woman would naturally make at her peak in her 30s or 20s. And so that's just not necessary. That's never been tested. There's no, their data, their safety data is literally no one died.
Right.
So we're good.
And you can't take it back. How about this?
There's never been a published curve, like we call a decay curve. Like you can't go into the literature and find, it's not studied. And so I'm not going to give them the least studied, most invasive, most expensive option that's going to, I make plenty of money. So I'm not going to use that as a cash cow for my clinic. I just have a very moral reason why I'm not doing that. And so I have wonderful ways to get her testosterone in her system that are safe and efficacious and are not going to overdose her.
Exactly. And let's not forget, you cannot take it back. Once you get that pellet, too bad. You got to wait for it to wear off. So if you've got a side effect or anything with it, too bad. Wait for 6 months until your pellet dissolves. Okay. Testosterone.
I'm a fan. For hypoactive sexual desire disorder, I love having options. So testosterone is usually my go-to. And I love having the other two FDA-approved options for my patients as well.
But would you automatically give it to someone who's even not complaining?
No.
Okay.
I wouldn't.
So everybody starts, you and I agree, start with estrogen and your progestin, whichever one that is. Mm-hmm. Testosterone as needed.
Optional as needed.
Okay. We basically agree on that. Estriol face cream.
I'm a fan. I've seen a big difference in my skin. I mean, the science is there. And I've used it actually from Alloy, and I pay for it out of pocket. I love it. And so I throw a lot of things at my skin, sunscreen, moisturizer, vitamin C. I do all the things a dermatologist recommend, but it was my best friend who's a dermatologist here in Galveston at the same university I used to work at, that recommended it to me. And it was just finding someone who would formulate it. And so when I learned that Alloy did it, and I trust you guys, and I've been using it, at least 2 years now.
Yeah. And, we do the same thing too. We do studies on it. So you don't have to take our word for it, but you can see it on your face. It either works for you or it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can see. All right. Quick ones. Now, yes or no? Does HRT prevent heart disease?
If started, yes, in certain patients.
I agree.
Data's clear.
Okay. Protein. Drink it or eat it?
Preferably eat it.
Okay. GLP-1s and HRT.
Absolutely.
I agree. See, you and I are simpatico. So this is why we do what we do. This has been so fun. You and I could go on for like 2 hours, and we probably will on another occasion. But Dr. Mary Claire Haver, menopause, and I would say menopause physician extraordinaire. And I have to really give you credit for raising this issue because, there's not a lot that we have out here that's new. The difference is that we needed the right messenger to elevate the message. So thank you very much. And please come back and see us on The Second Opinion anytime.
I will. Thank you so much for having me.
Menopause isn't a mystery. And it's certainly not something that women should simply endure. It's a long biologic transition that deserves thoughtful, evidence-based care. And too many women are still out here suffering because of outdated fears and misinformation. And especially for Black women, that burden is even heavier. And now it's time for the part of the show where I give my doctor's orders and leave you with takeaways from today's conversation. Number 1, menopause is not a moment in time. It is where you will live for 30 to 40% of your life. The menopausal transition or perimenopause can last for as long as a decade. Number 2, treat when symptomatic. There is no benefit to waiting. And HRT is the most effective treatment for menopausal symptoms. Number 3, supplements can be helpful. Take advice from experts who have actually studied nutrition. Make sure the supplements you take have been inspected by independent laboratories or verified by the USP or NSF. And for goodness sake, inform your doctor of any supplements that you may be using. For more information on this episode, check out our show notes. Join us each week as I break down medical topics and leave you with expert advice. Have a question you want to ask? Have feedback for the show? Submit your thoughts on my website, drsharonmalone.com/second opinion. Watch on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcasts.